Nobody came. She stood at the door of St. George's in her dead grandmother's gown, her stomach empty, because her mother said brides looked better hungry, and nobody came. 47 minutes. She counted them by the church clock. At 30, a curate whispered to her father. Her father's face went tight. He said nothing to her. At 40, her mother turned and looked at her, the way you look at food that has gone off. At 47, a man in a wet coat handed her father a sealed letter. Her father read it, folded it, put it away. He still did not look at her. Through the church door she could hear the congregation. They were not upset. She walked out the side door before her father could turn round. Into the alley along the north wall. A cat watched her from a ledge. She walked until the church sound was gone, then kept walking, because stopping meant standing still in the street, in her grandmother's gown, with rice, still in her hair, that her sister had put there that morning, laughing, and she was not going to do that. The letter was 11 sentences long. The Duke of Ashford had decided the match was unsuitable. He wished her family well. He trusted the matter could be kept quiet. No date, no salutation, no reason a person could hold. Her sister Harriet said in the parlour that she had always thought Cecily too bookish for a duke. Her mother let it stand. Her father came out of his study a week later with a plan involving their cousin Edmund, 43 years old, a farm in Shropshire, had expressed interest before. Cecily left for her aunt's house in Bath the following Tuesday. She had known for 5 weeks. She had told no one. Her aunt Helena was a widow of 14 years, with her own income and no patience for being managed. When Cecily arrived at her door with one trunk and no explanation, Helena said, "Come in then," and asked no direct questions for the rest of the week. The doctor confirmed it at 7 weeks. Helena came to her room, pulled a chair close, and said, "You have 3 choices, and I will help you with any of them. But you must choose before the month is out." Cecily chose the one her mother would have called ruin. Helena found her a small house outside the city, with a garden and a housekeeper named Mrs. Price, who had seen worse and said less. Cecily's grandmother had left her £300 and a collection of botanical drawings a London publisher turned out to want. She wrote about the drawings. The publisher asked for more. In London, in a house in Grosvenor Square, a man sat in his study on the evening of what should have been his wedding day, with a glass he had not touched, and a letter on his desk that he had read 12 times. The letter, sent to his solicitor and forwarded to him with a note of condolence, informed him that Miss Cecily Vane had withdrawn from the engagement by mutual agreement and wished him every happiness. It was signed with her name. The handwriting was neat and entirely unfamiliar, but he did not know that yet. He thought he did not know her handwriting well enough. He thought he should have known it better. He thought a great many things that evening that he would spend 3 years believing were true. His mother came to the study at 9 o'clock and stood in the doorway. She said, "I know this is painful. I know you believed the match was right. But some things reveal themselves in time, and perhaps it is better to know her character now than later." He said nothing. She said, "You will find your way through this. You always do." She left. He sat with the untouched glass until the fire went out. He did not find his way through it. He found his way around it, which is a different thing. He took on more estate work. He travelled to the Scottish property he had been neglecting. He accepted invitations he would previously have declined and sat at dinners, saying the right things to the right people, and came home to Grosvenor Square and sat in his study, and did not allow himself to wonder what she was doing. He was largely successful at this. Largely. There were nights in the second year when he unlocked the desk drawer and took out the solicitor's letter, and read it again, not because the words changed, because he kept believing they might, and they never did. 2 sons, both healthy. The solicitor thought his Grace should know. He would fold it back along its original lines and put it away and lock the drawer and go to bed and lie, there thinking about a woman who had walked out of her own life with nothing but £300, and whatever she had decided to make of herself. He admired her for it. He was not sure he was permitted to. He admired her anyway. He did not contact her. He had made a practice of listing the reasons when the temptation was strong enough to require countering. She had made her position clear. She had built a life. She was a published author. She had not asked him for a single thing, and underneath all of these reasons, the real one, he had believed her capable of making a reasonable decision. And so she had, and the decision had not included him. 6 weeks after the wedding that did not happen, his mother came to him with a suggested introduction. A Miss Wentworth, the daughter of a baronet, well-connected, accomplished, suitable in every particular. He listened to the list of her qualities and understood that his mother had been working on this for some time, that the details were too precise, and the case too neatly made for it to have been assembled quickly. He said he was not ready. His mother said, "Of course, whenever you feel able." He felt able to do nothing of the kind for 2 years and 8 months, and his mother, to her credit, did not press the matter again. He understood later that she had decided the problem would resolve itself without further intervention. He understood later a great many things about his mother that he had spent his whole life not quite looking at directly. The boys arrived on a Wednesday morning in late November, 22 months after the letter. 2 of them. She had not expected that. She named the elder Edmund for the poet. The younger she named Piers. Dark hair, both of them. Their father's grey eyes, pewter inside and pale water in good light. She did not write to the Duke. She wrote to her publisher and to Helena, who came at once and stayed 3 weeks, and left only when it was clear she was not needed, Mrs. Price told her on the 3rd evening that the boys were strong and well made. She said it once, then went back to the kitchen. 6 weeks later, the Duke's solicitor in Bath sent a letter to Grosvenor Square. 3 lines. Miss Cecily Vane had delivered 2 sons. Both were healthy. The solicitor thought his Grace should know. The Duke read it at his breakfast table on a Tuesday morning in January, with snow on the window ledge, and a pot of tea going cold beside him. He read it twice, set it down, looked at the window, picked it up again. 2 sons. He sat at that table for a long time. After the breakfast things were cleared. His secretary came at 10 with the morning correspondence, and stopped in the doorway, and then withdrew without speaking, because the secretary had worked for this family for 11 years, and understood when a room required leaving alone. He told no one. He wrote no letter. He sent no message. He had been told, in 11 sentences signed with her name, that she had made her position clear, and he had spent 22 months learning to respect it, and he would continue to respect it. He put the solicitor's letter in the locked drawer of his desk, the one that held the things he did not look at but could not discard, and he went about his day. 3 years passed. Cecily wrote 2 books. One pamphlet on the conditions facing widows in England, published under a different name. The second book carried her own name on the cover. Helena said nothing about it, which meant she approved. The second book took 14 months. She wrote it in the hours between the boys going to bed and midnight, which Mrs. Price understood to be working hours, and protected without being asked. The subject was property law, as it applied to women who had been widowed or abandoned, which was ostensibly academic, and was in fact something she understood from the inside, in a way no purely academic writer could. She was careful about this. She kept the Soji Register and let the precision do the work that anger would have done less well. Her publisher wrote back within the week. He said it was the most useful thing he had published in 5 years, and asked whether she had considered a lecture series. She had not. She considered it now. Helena came in October and read the proofs with her pencil and said, "This will make some people very uncomfortable," and said it the way she said things she approved of. Cecily sent the final pages in November. Edmund was 2 years old. Piers had recently discovered that he could open the garden gate if he stood on his brother's back to reach the latch, which required a new solution to the gate, and a conversation with Piers about the difference between clever and sensible, which Piers received with the polite attention of someone storing the information for future reference, rather than actually absorbing it. Edmund had colic for 4 months in his first year. Piers fell into the coal scuttle at 9 months and collected a scar above his left brow that the doctor said would fade. It did not entirely. They were loud and curious and very fond of Mrs. Price, who made an exception for them that she made for no one else and did not discuss. Bath society had opinions about Cecily. This was inevitable. A woman arriving from London with no husband and no explanation, renting a house outside the city, receiving a steady stream of correspondence from publishers, growing visibly with child before 3 months had passed, and then producing not 1 child but 2, and going on quietly about her business, as if none of it required comment. Bath had a great deal to say about this. She let it say what it liked. She had her work, and her sons, and Mrs. Price, and Helena, who came 4 times a year and stayed 2 weeks, and read her drafts with a pencil in her hand, and said what needed saying and nothing else. She had the garden, which she understood better each year. She had the bookseller on Milsom Street, who kept things aside for her, the baker 2 streets over, whose bread was worth the walk, the doctor who treated the 3 of them with the matter-of-fact competence of a man who measured people by what they did rather than what they were called. She did not go to London until a commission required it, a Mrs. Ardently had read her 2nd book and wanted educational materials produced for women without their own income. The commission paid well. She did not think about the Duke on the train. She thought about him for 40 seconds at Liverpool Street, when the London smell came back, coal and river and damp stone, and her body remembered the last time she had stood in this city, expecting a different life. Then a porter asked about her trunk. The meeting with Mrs. Ardently went well. There was a dinner afterward in Mayfair, 18 people. She wore grey silk. She sat down and found she was not afraid of anyone in the room. The Duke of Ashford arrived at 8:30. The room arranged itself around him, the way it always had. He was thinner. Something hard had settled into his jaw that she did not remember from before. He saw her before she saw him. When she looked up, he was already still. She held his gaze 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the woman beside her. "You were saying," she said, "about the Glasgow schools." He was seated 4 places away. The dinner lasted 2 hours. She ate everything on her plate. She spoke to the people on either side of her. She did not look at him again. After the dessert course, he crossed the room. "Cecily," he said. "Miss Vane," she said. He stood in front of her with the look of a man whose prepared words had all turned out wrong. "I heard you had been in Bath," he said. 3 years, she said. "I was told," he said, "that there were." He stopped. She waited. 2 boys, she said. "Edmund and Piers. They are well." The muscle in his jaw moved. "How old?" he said. 2 years and 4 months. Someone laughed at the far end of the table. A servant passed between them and moved on. The Duke stood in front of her with 3 years and 11 sentences between them, and nothing that was enough. She picked up her glass. "I have an early start," she said. "It was good to see you." She said good night to her hostess, collected her wrap, and walked out into the cold street. In the carriage she thought, Edmund needs new boots before winter. In the morning she booked her return to Bath for Friday. She did not go on Friday. The letter came Thursday evening, delivered by hand to her hotel. No stamp. The handwriting was not the Duke's. It was older, more controlled. Each letter formed with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime being precise about power. She had seen this hand once before, on a card attached to flowers sent to her mother when the engagement was announced. She had not thought about whose hand it was until now. She read it standing at the window with her coat still on. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford wrote that she had become aware of certain information, specifically 2 children currently residing in Bath. The Dowager was certain that Miss Vane, as a woman of good sense, understood the value of discretion. There were ways these matters could be handled quietly, to everyone's benefit. She suggested a meeting at an address in Belgravia. She looked forward to Miss Vane's reply. Cecily put the letter down on the writing desk. She picked it up again and read the 2nd paragraph. To everyone's benefit. She read it a 3rd time to be sure she had the shape of it right. The Dowager was not protecting her son. She was protecting his name from his son's. Cecily sat down on the edge of the bed with her coat still on, and her hands flat on her knees, and looked at the wall. She had built 3 years of life in Bath on the understanding that London was finished with her. She had not accounted for London deciding it was not finished. She had not accounted for a woman in Belgravia deciding that 2 boys with grey eyes were a problem that needed managing. Her hands were steady. She noticed that. She sat there for perhaps 10 minutes. Then she took off her coat, hung it on the back of the door, and sat down at the writing desk. She thought about writing to Helena. She wrote 3 sentences and stopped. There was nothing Helena could tell her that she did not already know. And saying it out loud, even in a letter, would make it larger than it needed to be tonight. She thought about the boys instead. Edmund, who woke slowly and needed 10 minutes and a cup of warm milk before the day made sense to him. Piers, who woke instantly and fully and hit the floor running and had to be caught before he reached the stairs. Mrs. Price, who managed both of them with a competence that looked like indifference and was not. They were in Bath. They were well. They were under no threat from this letter, because this letter had no power over them. She knew this. She also knew that a woman who had already forged one thing would not hesitate to forge another if she thought it necessary, and that the Dowager had sent this letter because she believed Cecily could be managed quietly, and that believing this was the Dowager's first and most significant mistake. She wrote to Helena after all. Then she wrote to Mr. Silas Croft on Gray's Inn Road, whose name Helena had given her 2 years ago with the words, "If anyone ever gives you trouble about the boys, go here first." Then she went to bed. She slept well. She had learned in 3 years of doing everything herself that problems did not become smaller by being worried at in the dark, and that the morning was always more useful than the night. In the morning she went to the offices of Mr. Silas Croft. He was a small man with very clean hands and the manner of someone who had seen most varieties of threat and found them, on balance, manageable. He read the Dowager's letter without expression. "She has no legal standing regarding your sons," he said. "None. You are their mother. That is the full extent of who has authority here. And if she speaks publicly," Cecily said. "Then she makes a choice," Mr. Croft said, "and you respond to it. Women in your position who have built something of their own, published under their name, established a reputation, they are considerably harder to ruin than the people trying to ruin them expect." He set the letter on his desk. "The Dowager is afraid of something," he said. "That is why she wants a meeting. People who hold all the power do not request meetings. They send instructions." Cecily looked at him. "She is afraid he will acknowledge them," she said. Mr. Croft looked back at her. "Yes," he said. "I rather think she is." She left his offices and walked back through the city. She did not go to Belgravia. The Duke called at her hotel on Saturday morning. She was told he was waiting in the lobby. She came downstairs in her working dress, notebook in hand. He was standing by the window with his hat turning slowly in his hands, which she had never seen him do with anything before. She said, "There is a sitting room on the first floor." It had 2 chairs and a fire that had burned low. She did not offer him tea. He did not sit down until she did. He looked at his hat for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I received a letter," he said, "the week after you left the dinner. Not from you. From my solicitor. He had been making inquiries on my behalf regarding certain documents from 3 years ago. I asked him to look into them after I saw you across that table." She said nothing. "The letter your family received on the morning of the wedding," he said. "The one saying I had withdrawn. It was not written by me. And the letter I received the week before the wedding, the one saying you had reconsidered the match, signed with your name." He stopped. "It was not written by you," she said. "No," he said. She looked at him across the low fire. "Both letters," he said. "The same hand, my mother's secretary." On her instruction, the fire shifted, a log dropped, she heard it. "She believed the match was wrong for me," he said. She had said so from the beginning. She thought if she could make it appear that both sides had withdrawn, neither family would press the matter, and it would simply end. He set his hat on the table beside him. "I spent 3 years believing you had changed your mind," he said. "I thought I knew why. I thought you had looked at the marriage clearly and decided it was not worth the difficulty. I did not question it because some part of me thought you were right to decide that." Cecily said, "I waited 47 minutes. "I know," he said. I counted them, she said. By the clock on the church, he did not look away. I know, he said again. I am sorry. I know that is not enough. She stood up and went to the window. The street below was ordinary. A woman with a basket. 2 men and a broken cartwheel. A boy running for no reason. She had spent 3 years being angry at the right person for the wrong reasons. He had walked away. She had been certain of it. She had built her entire life on the fact of it, and the fact was not true. The wound was real. The letter was not. She did not know what to do with that yet. Your mother wrote to me, she said, without turning from the window, 2 days ago. She suggested I value my discretion. He said nothing for a moment. She is afraid you will claim them, Cecily said. That is what the letter was about. Not the scandal, the acknowledgement. Behind her she heard him stand. Will you show me her letter, he said. She took it from her coat pocket and held it out without turning round. She heard him take it, heard him read it. The fire was the only other sound in the room, he said. I will give her 1 week to make this right on her own terms. After that I will handle it in a way she will not find comfortable. She turned then. He was folding the letter back into its original creases with the deliberate care of someone securing evidence. I am not here to ask you for anything, he said. I came because you had a right to know what happened. Whatever you decide to do with that information is yours entirely. He picked up his hat. I would like to meet them, he said. When you decide that is acceptable. If you decide that, you can write to my solicitor. There is no urgency. He left. She stood in the sitting room while his footsteps went down the stairs, and the front door opened and closed below. The fire had gone to ash. She had not noticed it going. She sat back down in the chair and looked at the empty grate. She had built 3 years around a letter she never sent. 3 years of understanding herself as a woman who had been left, who had turned that leaving into something, who owed nothing to anyone. It had been true in every way that mattered. It was still true, and underneath it was the different true thing, sitting very quietly, which was that the leaving had never happened. Neither of them had left. They had both been standing at the door of a church, waiting for a watcher, that a woman in Belgravia had already decided to cancel. He had believed her name on a page. She had believed his. Neither of them had thought to question it, because neither of them had any reason to, and that was the coldest part of it, not that it had been done, but how easily it had worked. She let herself look at that for a while. She wrote to Helena that evening. Not directly about the Duke. She wrote about Edmund's questions, the ones he had been asking for months, about fathers and families and why things were the way they were in their particular household. She wrote about how she had been answering him, honestly and carefully, giving him what was true without giving him what was not yet settled. She had not told Edmund his father's name. She had not told him his father existed in any specific sense. She had told him that his family was herself and Piers and Mrs. Price and Helena, and that some families looked one way, and some looked another, and that theirs looked the way it looked, which was fine. This had satisfied him at 3. At 4 he had begun pushing at the edges of it in the way that children push at edges, when they sense there is something on the other side. He was not unhappy, he was not distressed, he was simply thorough, which was, she supposed, his father's quality as much as hers. She had thought, more than once in the past year, about what she would say when the questions became specific enough to require a specific answer. She had been waiting, she understood now, for the situation to resolve itself into something she could work with. The situation had now resolved itself, whether she liked the resolution or not, and she did not yet know whether she did. It was what it was. The fact of what had been done to both of them did not change her life or undo her choices. It added information she had not had. The anger she had built the last 3 years on had been rightly directed at the wrong target, and she could be angry about that too if she wanted, and she could also decide that anger was finished, and something more useful was called for. She did not know yet which she would choose. She sealed Helena's letter and set it by the door for the morning. Outside, London went about its Thursday evening. Carriages, a distant argument, someone singing 2 streets over, badly and not caring. Then she went to find Mr. Croft. On the 5th day of the Duke's week, a carriage arrived at Cecily's hotel. Not the Dowager's carriage, the Duke's. The footman presented a card and a sealed note. The note was from the Duke. It said only, "She has asked to come to you. I have told her she may ask. The choice is entirely yours." Cecily turned the card over in her hand. She told the footman, "She may come up." The Dowager Duchess of Ashford was 71 years old, small, and dressed in the particular way of women who have spent decades ensuring a room understood their position before they spoke in it. She came into the sitting room and stood near the door and looked at Cecily with an expression that was not quite what Cecily had expected. She had expected coldness. What she saw instead was a woman calculating the distance between where she stood and something she wanted, and understanding the distance was not hers to close. "Please sit down," Cecily said. The Dowager sat. There was a silence. "I will not insult you," the Dowager said, "by pretending what I did was anything other than what it was. I made a decision about my son's life that was not mine to make. I told myself it was the right decision. I have had 3 years to understand that it was not." Cecily said nothing. "I have 2 grandsons," the Dowager said, "whom I have never met. That is also a consequence of what I did." Her hands were in her lap, folded over each other. They were not steady. Cecily noticed that. "He showed me their names," the Dowager said. "Edmund and Piers." She paused. "He told me what Edmund is named for." Cecily looked at her. The Dowager looked back. There was something in her face that had not been there at the beginning of the conversation. A fatigue that went deeper than the morning. "When my son was 22, she said, "he fell into something like an attachment with a girl from Cumberland, the daughter of a clergyman. Very pretty. Very good. No money, no connection, no use to anyone. I discouraged it. I was right to discourage it. He was not yet established. The estate was still in recovery. And a match like that would have closed certain doors that needed to remain open for at least another 5 years." She was looking at the fire. "I became accustomed to being right about these things," she said. "I became accustomed to acting on my rightness without waiting to be asked. By the time you entered the picture, I had been doing it for 20 years, and it had never produced a consequence I could not manage." The cart horse had gone from the window. A woman with a basket stood in its place briefly, then walked on. "I thought you were wrong for him," the Dowager said. "I thought you were clever and stubborn, and that you would make his life difficult in ways he did not understand yet. I was not entirely wrong about the clever and stubborn. I was entirely wrong about the rest. I wanted a particular future for him," the Dowager continued. "I had decided what it should look like. I decided it so completely that I made it happen, and I did not think far enough forward to understand what I was actually doing. I thought I was protecting him. I understand now that I was protecting an admirer I had of him, which is a different thing entirely, and a great deal less useful." The fire was good today. Neither of them had moved. "I am not asking you to forgive me," the Dowager said. "I know what I did is not the kind of thing that gets forgiven on request in a hotel sitting room. I am asking whether there is any path forward that does not require my son to spend the rest of his life paying for my choices." Cecily looked at her for a long moment. "That," she said, "is a question for your son, not for me." The Dowager looked back at her. "You are right," she said. "Yes, you are right." She stood. She had picked up her gloves from the arm of the chair and put them on slowly, one finger at a time, with the care of someone who has learned that the small physical actions of a room are the only ones fully under her control. "There is one other thing," she said at the door. She did not turn round. "I read your second book," she said, "the one on widows, the pamphlet as well, though I know you did not put your name to that one." Cecily said nothing. "I thought it was very fine work," the Dowager said. She opened the door and left. Cecily sat in the chair for a while after the sound of her footsteps faded on the stairs. Then she went home to Bath on Sunday. Edmund ran at her from the front door before she reached the step. She caught him and held on longer than she usually let herself. Piers came behind him at a more considered pace, climbed her coat as if it were a ladder, and told her that Mrs. Price had burned the porridge twice, and that he had eaten it both times and felt this. Deserved acknowledgement. She carried them both inside. Mrs. Price stood in the kitchen doorway. Sorted, she said. Not a question. Cecily put the boys down. Nearly, she said. She wrote to the Duke's solicitor 6 weeks later. She set her terms in plain sentences. The boys would not be moved or disrupted. They would not be presented to anyone as proof of anything. If the Duke wished to know them, he would come to Bath without announcement on her schedule, and he would be ordinary around them because they were ordinary children, and she intended them to stay that way. She did not write, "You have to earn this." She did not need to. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in February on the mail coach, not a private carriage. He brought himself and a simple wooden toy horse. Edmund took it without ceremony. Piers immediately tried to claim it. She left them in the garden and went to the kitchen. Through the window she could see the Duke sitting on the bench by the wall while both boys talked at him simultaneously about a hedgehog that lived under the garden wall, a bird that had eaten Mrs. Price's seedlings, and the time Edmund had locked Piers in the coal shed, which Piers disputed at length and volume. He listened to all of it. He asked about the hedgehog. He was given both sides of the coal shed argument at the same time. He did not look like a man being tested. He looked like a man who had been given something he had stopped believing he would receive, and was being very careful not to drop it. Mrs. Price stood beside her at the window. They drank their tea. He came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. On the third Tuesday, he arrived to find Edmund sitting on the front step, refusing to come inside, because he had been told he could not bring the hedgehog into the kitchen, which he felt was unreasonable. The Duke sat down on the step beside him. Cecily watched from the hallway. She could not hear what they said. She saw Edmund's posture change, the particular loosening of a child being taken seriously. She saw the Duke listen. She saw Edmund consider whatever had been said, and then stand up and go inside, not happily, but with the dignity of a person who had been heard. The Duke came in. He did not mention it. She did not ask. On the fourth Tuesday, she came out to call them in for supper, and found him on his hands and knees in the garden dirt, helping Piers construct what Piers described as a road for beetles. The Duke had mud on his coat sleeve. He looked up at her. "Supper," she said. He got up. Piers objected. The Duke told him the beetles would manage the road themselves overnight, and this was accepted as reasonable. On the fifth Tuesday it rained, and the boys were confined to the house, which they managed by pulling every book off the lower shelf and building a structure they called a castle that required the Duke to sit inside it on the floor, with his knees up near his chin, while both boys explained the rules of the castle to him, which were numerous and changed every few minutes. He sat in the castle for an hour and a half. Cecily brought tea through. She set the cup on the floor beside him without a word and went back to her desk. On the sixth Tuesday, after the boys were in bed, she made tea and they sat either side of the kitchen fire. She told him about the new commission, a series of readers for girls in parish schools, underfunded and needed by the spring. He told her about an estate boundary dispute that had been running for 2 years, involving a stream that had changed course in the wet winter of 1848, and had not changed back. Neither of them said anything that was not entirely ordinary, and it was the most comfortable evening she had spent in longer than she could easily name. At 9 he put on his coat. "Same time next week," she said. "The back fence needs seeing to." He looked at her. "Same time next week," he said. The back fence got done, then the east wall, then a gate that had dropped on its hinge over the winter, Mrs. Price kept making enough supper for 4 without being asked or thanked. In May, on a Tuesday warm enough to leave the kitchen door open, she took the boys into the city to collect a parcel from the bookseller on Milsom Street. The Duke had come that morning and fixed the east gate, and stayed for the afternoon. He walked with them. She had not planned this. He had simply been there when she put on her coat, and the boys had taken his hands without asking, one on each side, and pulled him out the door with them. And by the time she had locked up and turned round, they were already halfway down the path. Milsom Street was busy. A Tuesday in May brought out the whole of Bath society, the ladies doing their morning rounds, the officers in their red coats, the older families who spent the season there, and made it their business to know everything and everyone. Mrs. Halford saw her first. Mrs. Halford was the wife of a magistrate, and the central fact of Bath's social life, the woman through whom all information travelled, and in whose opinion all reputations were ultimately decided. She had known Cecily's Aunt Helena for 30 years, and had been very interested, in a particular way, in Cecily's arrival in Bath 3 years ago. She was not unkind. She was simply the kind of woman who kept accurate accounts of everyone around her, and Cecily had been, until now, a debt in her ledger. She was standing outside the Glovers with 2 other women when Cecily came round the corner with the boys and the Duke. The street did not stop. People kept moving. But something shifted in the small radius around Mrs. Halford, a stillness that spread outward to her 2 companions, then to the women coming out of the linen drapers, then to the officer who had been about to tip his hat and instead forgot to. Mrs. Halford looked at Cecily. She looked at the Duke. She looked at the 2 boys holding his hands, dark-haired and grey-eyed, and entirely at ease, not performing anything, not dressed up for presentation. Just 2 small boys on a Tuesday morning in May, who had pulled a man out of a house by his hands because they wanted to show him the dog outside the coffee house. She put everything together in the way that women like Mrs. Halford put things together, quickly and completely and without being told. Then she looked back at Cecily and inclined her head. Not the small nod of social equals, the deliberate acknowledgement one gives to someone whose position has just been made clear. "Good morning, Miss Vane," she said. "Good morning, Mrs. Halford," Cecily said. They walked on. She did not look at the Duke. He did not say anything. Edmund was asking about the dog, tied up outside the coffee house, and Piers had stopped to examine a crack in the pavement with the focused intensity of a man who has discovered something of great scientific significance. She collected her parcel from the bookseller. They walked home through the upper town. The boys ran ahead on the wide pavement, and the Duke walked beside her, and neither of them mentioned Milsom Street. They did not need to. Mrs. Halford would tell 6 people by noon. By evening the information would have reached every household in Bath that mattered. By the following week it would be settled fact that the Duke of Ashford walked through the city with Cecily Vane's boys holding his hands, and that Mrs. Halford had greeted her, and that everyone now understood what everyone had quietly wondered for 3 years. Cecily had not planned it. She was glad it happened the way it did, with the boys pulling him out the door, and the morning being warm and the bookseller's parcel waiting, ordinary in every part. That was the only way she would have wanted it. The following Thursday a card arrived from Mrs. Halford, inviting Miss Vane to an evening, gathering the 2nd week of June. It was the first such invitation Cecily had received since arriving in Bath 3 years ago. She wrote back and accepted. She went. She wore the grey silk. She spoke to the people around her and was spoken to in return. And twice in the course of the evening women came to be introduced to her because they had read her 2nd book and wanted to say so. Mrs. Halford steered her toward both of them with the smooth efficiency of a woman returning a debt she had decided to repay. At the end of the evening, at the door Mrs. Halford said, "We are very pleased to have you properly among us, Miss Vane." Cecily said, "Thank you," and meant it without needing anything more from it. The Tuesdays continued through June. On the last Tuesday of the month, warm enough that the kitchen door had been open all day, Edmund called him by his first name by accident in the middle of a sentence about beetles, and then stopped and looked at his mother. She was looking at her tea. "It is fine," she said. Edmund turned back and kept talking. She did not look up for a moment. When she did, the Duke was watching her, and he had the expression of a man who understood exactly what had just been offered and intended to be worthy of it for the rest of his life. She looked back at her tea. "The south fence," she said. "When the ground is dry enough." "When the ground is dry enough," he said. Outside the kitchen window the garden was going gold with the last of the evening. The boys were upstairs. Mrs. Price's dishes were drying on the rack. The fire was good. Nobody had given her any of this. Not the house, not the books, not the commission, not the garden, not Mrs. Price and her particular silences, not the 2 boys asleep upstairs with their father's eyes. Not the bookseller who kept things aside. Not the doctor who measured people by what they did. Not the invitation from Mrs. Halford. Not the women at the gathering who had read her book and wanted to say so. She had built every piece of it in the years when she had £300 and a set of drawings and a door she could close on her own terms. It had held. It was holding. And now there was someone in it who had come on the mail coach and fixed the gate and learned about the hedgehog and gotten mud on his coat helping with a beetle road and sat inside a castle on the kitchen floor with his knees up near his chin for an hour and a half, and who understood, without being told, that none of this had been given to him. He was here because she had decided he could be. That was the whole of it. Outside, the last of the light went off the garden wall. She picked up her tea, so she said, the south fence. When the ground is dry, he said. She drank her tea, he drank his. The fire burned. Helena arrived in Bath the week after Cecily returned from London. She had not been sent for. She came because she had received 2 letters in 4 days, and read the space between them correctly. She arrived on the Tuesday evening coach with 1 bag, and the expression of a woman who has already decided she will not say the obvious thing until she is sure the obvious thing needs saying. She and Cecily sat up late that first night after the boys were in bed and Mrs. Price had made tea and gone to her room. Cecily told her everything in the order it had happened, without commentary or editorial, laying the facts down the way she had laid them down for herself in the hotel sitting room in London, which was the only useful way to handle them. Helena listened without interrupting. When Cecily finished, Helena sat with it for a moment. Both letters, Helena said. Yes, Cecily said. Helena picked up her tea, set it down. I have been angry on your behalf for 3 years, Helena said. I find I am now angry on your behalf about something different and considerably more specific. Yes, Cecily said. Helena looked at her. And the man himself, Helena said. What do you make of him? Cecily considered this. He came on the mail coach, she said. Helena absorbed this. He fixes things, Cecily said. He sat in a castle on the kitchen floor for an hour and a half. Helena said nothing for a moment, and the dowager, she said. Came in person, Cecily said. Her hands were not steady. Helena was quiet for a while. She said she had read the pamphlet, Cecily said. Helena looked at her sharply. She said it was very fine work, Cecily said. Helena put her tea down. Good God, she said. She actually said that. Yes. Cecily said. Helena sat back in her chair and looked at the fire. Well, she said. They sat with that for a while. Helena left on the Saturday. At the door she held Cecily's face in both hands. For a moment, the way she had the night. Cecily had arrived with 1 trunk and no explanation, and said nothing, and got into the carriage. Cecily stood at the gate and watched it go. The gate latch caught properly now. He had fixed it in March. She went back inside. By July the south fence was repaired, and the kitchen had a new shelf that did not lean, and the garden had been properly dug, over for the first time since she had moved in. The boys called him by his first name, as a matter of course now, which had happened gradually and without announcement. Piers had decided that he was the right height for sitting on, and used him as a chair during the reading of the evening story which he bore, with the gravity of a man who has been entrusted with something important. Edmund asked her one evening in July, while she was pinning his jacket, whether Thomas, which was the Duke's first name, was going to live with them. She kept pinning. Not at the moment, she said. Edmund considered this with the thoroughness he brought to everything. Is he going to later, he said. She pinned the last pin. That, she said, is something we will have to see about. Edmund accepted this and went off to find Piers. She sat on the edge of his bed for a moment after he left. 3 years ago she had made a life on the understanding that she owed no one anything and no one owed her anything, and that this was fine, that it was in fact the safest possible position, because a position that did not depend on anyone else could not be taken away. The position had held. She had built it correctly, and it had held. And now Edmund was asking questions about later, and Piers was using someone as furniture, and there were 6 months of Tuesdays behind her, and the south fence was done, and the kitchen shelf did not lean, and she was sitting on her son's bed, thinking about what we will have to see about. She stood up downstairs. The fire was going, and Mrs. Price was in the kitchen, and the boys were arguing about something in the garden, in the long July light. She went downstairs. The following Tuesday he came at the usual time. He fixed the last section of the north wall, which had been dropping a stone every time it rained. Supper was lamb and Mrs. Price's bread, and the boys ate most of it and argued about the rest. After supper, Piers fell asleep on the sitting-room floor, in the middle of a sentence about beetles, and had to be carried up, which the Duke did without being asked, because he was closest, and Piers was already most of the way asleep, and it was simply the practical thing. Edmund went up on his own, with dignity. The house went quiet. She made tea. They sat in the kitchen. He said, "Edmund asked me something today, while we were working on the wall." She waited. "He asked me whether I was his father," the Duke said. She looked at her tea. "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him that was a question for his mother," the Duke said. He seemed satisfied with that. He went back to the wall. She looked at the fire. "He will ask me tomorrow," she said. "Yes," the Duke said. She turned her cup around in her hands once. "What would you like me to tell him?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I would like you to tell him the truth," he said. "Whatever you decide the truth is. However much of it you decide he is ready for. I will follow your lead entirely. I only want to be whatever he needs me to be, and I will not push past the boundary you set." She looked at him. He looked back at her. The fire was burning well. Outside, the garden was dark and still, and the north wall was solid now. And the gate latched and the fence stood straight. She said, "All right," he said. "All right." She drank her tea, he drank his. Edmund asked her the next morning before breakfast, standing in the kitchen doorway in his nightshirt, with his hair sideways from sleep. She told him yes. He thought about this for a moment with the same concentrated thoroughness he brought to everything. Then he said, "All right," and went to find Piers. She stood at the kitchen window with her tea, going cold in her hands, and watched the garden and did not say anything for a while, because there was nothing to say, because it was done, because the morning was ordinary, and the boys were upstairs, and the gate latched properly, and the fire needed banking, and there was work waiting on her desk. She banked the fire. She went to her desk. She picked up her pen. Outside, the last of the morning came over the garden wall, and the day went on. There was a letter on the desk from her publisher. A third book, he said, if she had one in her. He had 3 ideas and wanted to know if any of them were hers. She read the letter twice, put it down, picked it up again. Outside she could hear Piers explaining something to Edmund at considerable volume. She could not hear the words, but she knew the rhythm of it, the rising insistence that meant he had a theory and intended to make it stick. Edmund's replies came in shorter intervals, which meant he was pushing back. This would continue for approximately 4 minutes, and then one of them would lose interest, and they would go and do something else entirely. She had learned the rhythms of her house over 3 years, the creak on the second stair, the particular sound the garden gate made when the wind was coming from the east, the way Mrs. Price's footsteps changed when she was carrying something heavy, the 47 minutes by a church clock. Some things you learn because you have to. Some things you learn because you are paying attention. She had spent 3 years paying attention to everything, because when you have built something yourself, there is no one else to notice when it needs tending. She picked up her pen and wrote back to her publisher. She had a third book. She had, in fact, had it for some time. She had been waiting to know where it ended. She thought she knew now. She folded the letter, addressed it, set it with Helena's from the previous week to be posted. Tuesday was 4 days away. She had 4 days of work, and the boys needed seeing to, and Mrs. Price had mentioned the kitchen window was stiff, and probably wanted the frame looked at, and there was a commission due before the end of the month, and a letter to Mr. Croft she had been meaning to write for 2 weeks. 4 days was plenty. She opened the notebook to the next clean page. She wrote the first line. Outside the boys had gone quiet, which meant they were either doing something sensible or something that required investigation. She listened for a moment. The garden gate opened and closed, both of them by the sound of the footsteps, heading down toward the lower end of the garden where the hedgehog lived. Tuesday they would tell him about it in exhaustive detail. He would ask the right questions. They would be satisfied. She had built every piece of this herself, the house and the work and the garden, and the particular quality of a Tuesday evening, with the fire going and the dishes drying and the day done. She had built it in the years when she had £300 and a set of drawings and 47 minutes that she had counted one by a church clock in her dead grandmother's gown it had held. She wrote the second line. The morning was ordinary, and hers. She kept writing. The Tuesday after Edmund's question, the Duke arrived at the usual time. Edmund opened the door before he knocked. He stood on the step and looked at him. The Duke looked back. Edmund said, "Come in then," and stepped aside in a way that was so precisely the way Helena stepped aside when you arrived at her door, that Cecily, watching from the hallway, had to look away for a moment. She heard the Duke say, "Thank you." She heard Edmund say, "The beetles have made the road longer. Piers says they did it themselves, but I think it was the rain." She heard them go toward the garden. Mrs. Price appeared at her shoulder. "Well, Mrs. Price said." "Yes," Cecily said. Mrs. Price went back to the kitchen. Cecily went to her desk. Through the window she could see the crew crashing over the beetle road, with both boys explaining the rain theory simultaneously, and he was listening to both of them with the same focused attention he gave to everything. The estate dispute, and the faulty gate, and the castle, and the kitchen shelf, and the 47 minutes she had told him about in a sitting room with a low fire. He had not wasted a single Tuesday. She turned back to her desk. The third book was going well. She wrote for an hour before supper. She wrote a page and a half after the boys were in bed. She wrote in the particular silence of a house where everyone was accounted for and nothing required her immediate attention, and the pen moved easily and the words came as they came when the work was right. She was, it turned out, going to be fine. She had always been going to be fine. She had known this on some level since the morning she had woken up in a small house outside, Bath with £300 and a set of drawings and 2 boys who were going to need feeding, and understood that being fine was not something that happened to a person, but something a person built. One day at a time, until it was solid enough to stand on. She had built it solid, and now the south fence was done, and the gate latched, and the kitchen shelf stood straight, and there were Tuesdays stretching forward, ordinary and sufficient, and Edmund had opened the door and said, "Come in then," and the beetle road was longer from the rain. And both boys had a theory about it, and Mrs. Price was making enough for 4. She wrote the last line of the chapter, read it back. It was right. She closed the notebook, capped the pen, and went to call everyone in for supper.